Hello and welcome to Pod Keep Our Land. Sorry we've been off for the past couple of weeks, but we had to take some time to go on vacation or have a round number birthday related existential crisis, but we are back and we are recording podcasts for you again this fall. But as a special treat, we are going to leave you with a collaboration that we did. The folks at Politicoast invited us to come on to their 50th anniversary episode. It was a live show, it was a lot of fun, and we're really grateful for them for doing it. So without further ado, on with the show.
So we're back for part two. We're here with the Pod Keep Our Land crew. Introduce yourselves. Let's start from this end.
I'm Erin Rennie.
Erin, what's your background?
I've done lots of different kinds of political things and studied political science. And it's great to be here with my people, fans of BC politics. It's a real delight to see a room full of people who want to geek out about BC politics, who are not the youth wing of a political party.
They're the youth wing of all political parties.
It's been really fun so far, and so thanks for having us on the show.
I'm Patrick Meehan. I geography at UBC, and I went to UBC much like my two podcast compatriots. And my background, I guess, I got involved in student politics early on and sort of stayed in it for farther than I should have. But I came from Surrey, and I spent a bit of time in the Surrey New Democrats.
I am Matthew Naylor, and I was a very partisan child growing up in Alberta.
What does partisan child mean, by the way?
Well, no, I had the buttons. I had like a liberal sign on my locker.
You were a liberal in Alberta.
No. You voted NDP once, didn't you?
No. In grade 8, when my social studies teacher, she said that this was during the 2000 election, she would vote for whomever her class elected her to vote for, and I voted NDP when I was in grade 8 when I was 14, and so I got over that
you've done it once,
not having a brain thing, and then mellowed out into a nice centrist.
See, I remember growing up in Alberta. I grew up just outside Calgary, and when I was a kid, our middle school, early high school, that same age, had us write the essay about who would you vote for in this election. Might even be in the same election. I think I wrote an essay about why I'd vote for the Reform Party, because the West needed a voice. And that just sort of tells you how much I adopted the generic rhetoric that was around me.
Still wearing green.
It was only later I learned that the West's voice was kind of stupid, and I didn't agree with that. And now I vote NDP because there's not anything better. I love Royal Canadian Air Force at that time. That was what I grew up on. All right, well, we're back, and we want to talk about the BC Liberal leadership race with you guys, and we want to talk about the federal cabinet shuffle and the Shadow Cabinet. But first, maybe let's just do a quick free plug for your podcast, Pod Keep Our Land. What is it? How did it get started? Why should people listen?
Pod Keep Our Land is a show about Canadian politics, parliament's policy, and politicians. We got started because I got back from Australia. I recently did some school in Australia, and I got back and I went out for beers with Pat, and we ended up coming up with this idea about starting a podcast. Okay, all right. You tell the story.
You pitched the idea to me, and I said, as long as you really cut down the partisanship,
which it is an interesting thing for me. Because,
and I think I made you thrice promise.
The dark occult rituals that went into the beginning of the podcast aside, partisanship for me was something that I really enjoyed and got involved with, and then around last November, for reasons that something happened last November that was a bit of a shock to my world, and after the election of the current president, I kind of reevaluated how people could engage in politics and wanted to see about having a little bit more of a adult and nuanced conversation about policy and stuff.
Yeah, so then I agreed to it, and then
I asked Erin, and things have snowballed from there. And so we encourage you to check out Pod Keep Our Land, which is available on the iTunes Store, on Stitcher now. We just got our approval for Stitcher, and on our website, which is currently podkeepourland.podbean.com, but we're hopefully getting something going up there pretty soon.
Cool. And since I don't think I've ever asked you, Scott, what's your version of the Politicoast founding story? Because I have my version, but...
It was more or less one day you messaged me. I think I was at work at the time, but you Facebook messaged me saying, "Hey, you want to start a podcast?" And yeah, that was more or less how it started. We met up for beers a day or two later and kind of hashed it out. But yeah, the long and the short of it is there wasn't a voice for kind of BC politics at the time, and you had a bunch of lefty friends, and you wanted someone who wouldn't always just nod along with you every time you said something on the podcast.
Yeah, we debated it enough pub nights, but in enough of a way that we could find common ground, or at least you weren't the Kelly Leach level of
the bar of a good conservative. You're not Kelly Leach.
Yeah, he's a Michael Chong conservative, and he'll freely admit that, right?
So a new Democrat.
basically the same thing these days.
Don't even get me started the number of times I had to hear he's just a liberal during the campaign.
Not a liberal. Oh.
See, I've listened to all your shows, I'll be honest, and
Thank you.
They're good.
Normally people lie about
I took
that.
you as more of a conservative, but I guess, BC liberal and federal liberal.
Yeah, I'm BC liberal, federal liberal, grew up in Alberta, so that I have conservative tendencies,
I think it's safe to say that there's two liberal parties in British Columbia. There's the Liberal Party in the Lower Mainland, at least areas not south of the Fraser. And that Liberal Party is fairly urbane. It's the Moira Stillwell Party to a large degree, which, by the way, if you're not following Moira Stillwell on Twitter, it's great. And I think that, Naylor, you fall into that realm. And then there's the sort of the Beyond Hope Liberal Party that, yeah.
Which is more the federal conservative party.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's say.
We're a coalition party. It's a big tent.
Well, since we're into this, the big news this week was that the BC Liberals announced their leadership rules, and they sort of immediately had to amend them because they realized they had accidentally scheduled their leadership announcement for Super Bowl Sunday. And unsurprisingly, the BC Liberal membership and the Super Bowl Sunday following had a very large sort of overlap in that Venn diagram. And they went, well, we can't have that. NDP would not have this problem.
I'm just going to say that it does kind of give you an idea of the kind of person who's sitting on the provincial executive boards, because that clearly didn't cross their mind.
I do want to say, though, that I got to hand kudos to whoever runs the Twitter account for the BC Liberals, because tweeting after requesting for a change of date for the Super Bowl, the NFL rejected it. And so now we have decided to move the date of our leadership convention. I got to say, that is the best social media move I've seen in a long time, of trying to find a bad news day and turn it good.
That's pretty funny.
So aside from the moving of the date, does anyone want to run us through the BC Liberal leadership rules sort of headlines, or should we just wait until I've pulled them up, Erin?
Sure. So one of the things that really struck me was the spending cap has gone up quite significantly since the last leadership race. It was $450,000 in 2011. Now it's $600,000 for your campaign, which is pretty significant. You have to be able to, if that's the cap, most people are going to go up to the cap, and you have to be able to raise that much money in order to participate in this race. So that leaves a lot of people out, leaves a lot of voices out, I would think.
Do you think that affects the image of the BC Liberals, which going into this last election was very heavy on the, big money Liberals? They need they're the ones who, until the very last minute, were not in favor of a campaign finance reform, and here they are sort of basically being open to as big a money as they can in their leadership race.
Yeah, it does really speak to that issue of campaign finance, and when BC is getting international news on campaign finance being the Wild West over here in BC on who can donate how much, it raises eyebrows. So I don't know. It's good that we've got a cap at least, I guess.
I do tend to think that people don't pay attention to leadership races, the public generally. I think that could be an attack that would be fairly salient given that it's already perceived weakness. But I also don't think that generally the general public pays attention too much to leadership races, anywhere near as much as they should.
I think the actual impact of whether or not the BC Liberals, like I would prefer that the cap be basically the same as last time, because allowing
because it worked really well last time.
I don't know. We got a leader out of it. What more do you want?
That is not a baseline for success. On a
we got a leader. We won an election. Like it's like there is. I don't see it actually like being that big of a deal. Sure, I understand the bigger issue around like campaign finance and that kind of thing, but those rules are going to get changed, and it's one of those things about water and pavement. You just find every crack and seep into it, and that's money. And in politics, it's there's a lot. There's
the analogy
that was.
Yeah, I structured that analogy.
At Pod Keep Our Land, our analogies are nothing if not tortured.
But I just don't see it like being a big voting issue that people are going to cast a ballot on.
Oh no.
In a year and a half when the next general election is.
I think it's $200,000. Like, is that really going to be the difference between someone voting for the Liberals or not? What the spending cap was on the leadership race? It just doesn't seem to be a huge thing that people will really care about.
I think the more interesting thing for me is the breakdown of votes for the leadership race, and how every riding matters in the BC Liberal leadership race. And it's a model of leadership voting that I actually really support. Is the votes are weighted by riding, and so if there's 1,000 members in one riding and there's 5 members in the other riding, those 5 members have far more influence on the overall result than the 1,000 members. And I actually think that actually adds democracy to the system, because it means that areas that the BC Liberals are not strong on still have a voice.
It's a very I was going to say it's very similar. It's the exact same model that the federal Conservatives have, which is, weight by riding. And when you have the electoral system we have, single member plurality, it's not easy to say that word after. I'm not going to say how many beers, but beers.
A plurality.
A plurality of beers. It makes sense. It makes sense to sort of weight by riding, because especially after this last election where the Liberals were weak in urban centers, but strong in rural areas, and they need to sort of balance that out. So the system does favor sort of a candidate who can appeal broadly, which is what you need in an election.
Especially for a party like the BC Liberals, or to a slightly lesser extent the Conservatives, that are a big tent party who need to be, if they're going to be successful, get in support from all of those ridings.
Well, I think it's also interesting is that we talk about the Lower Mainland and the interior when it comes to the BC Liberals. There's a third part of BC. And I think that the island is going to play a part in this because of this system. Whereas normally on the island, there's, I think, 14 ridings. My numbers might be out of date, but there's like 14 ridings on the island. I think the Liberals traditionally get 2 of them. And so those island ridings will also have a voice. So every leadership candidate will also have a reason to go to the island and actually care about island issues and want to talk about BC ferries and want to talk about the other issues that the BC Liberals have frankly not cared about for a while. I like the leadership system because it makes you want to be the leader of the whole province.
So I had the distinct privilege of being one of the 200 or so most valuable BC Liberals in the last election, because I was living in Vancouver Mount Pleasant at the time, which is a hotbed of BC Liberal activism. And I had picked my candidate, which was Christy Clark at the time, and this was basically how her campaign won the election for her, is by going and targeting and focusing on membership sales in areas that the BC Liberal Party was not traditionally strong. And so not only picking up places where the other candidates didn't have like strong networks, but being able to pick up particularly valuable voters who would be able to send more points to the leadership convention.
I want to pick up on something Pat said about urban-rural divide, and a lot of it has been written about this and said about, you know, are they going to go more urban? Are they going to go more rural? Who do they have to pick in order to beat John Horgan? And I'm beginning to question whether there really is an urban-rural divide in the province. I think it's a good point you make about the island being, you know, the third voice here that we do need to consider. But when you think about Christy Clark, like, she wasn't really a rural candidate. She doesn't come from.
Well, she represented Kelowna.
Well, only after she lost
only after she,
Vancouver.
Yeah.
Right.
No, your point.
Like,
Your point is.
we're talking
My jokes aside.
Yeah, we're talking about a former mayoral candidate here
No.
for Vancouver.
My jokes aside, I think you're onto something
Yeah.
really accurate here.
Yeah. So I think a lot is being said about this urban-rural thing, but I don't think that's what is going to make the difference in this campaign. I think it's going to be more about who can present a vision for the whole province that is going to really excite people and make people want to get behind them. So, and it's got to be something more than families or jobs.
Do you think there's any of you, in this race? Not that there's a race yet, but
Are there any of us in this race?
well, no. Is there anyone
there is a
name
race.
who's been tossed
But
around?
I think the thing is that there is a race. Even if no one has put their name in yet, people have put their name in consideration.
Yeah.
People are meeting with people. I mean, even just average members of the party are meeting with actual MLAs or actual candidates, like the potential candidates already, and having private meetings with them and saying, "Hey, I want to be on your team." I think that the beauty of a leadership race, the really interesting thing about a leadership race, is it truly is really grassroots, and it's really exciting to watch it unfold.
I'm just going to take one quick jab because it's so easy. And reading through the rules, there's this one section on party unity, which
Oh yeah.
I've looked at a couple of these documents. I haven't looked at every leadership race document ever, but I just noticed in this one, this party unity section, Article 9, where 9.1 is all leadership contestants must in writing undertake to the party to, and A is pledge their support for the leader, which I get the point of. Like, you kind of just need to say, no matter what happens, like if you're a BC Liberal running for BC Liberal leadership, no matter who wins, you should probably get behind that leader, or else why are you running for leadership?
It's the BC Conservatives.
But there's
asterisk. It's the don't run for leader to raise your profile and then jump ship to the BC Conservatives when you don't win. And I know that this happens municipally. I've seen it happen in municipal elections where I was a staff person on, not Vancouver, but and it does happen as the non-compete clause essentially, and they're not enforceable. God knows they're not enforceable, but it's a way for you to be able to hit them over the head with it later. And I think
because it goes beyond that. It talks about, like, you know, you have to pledge to campaign for this person. You have to do all these other things.
One fear that the Free Market Party in BC, and it changes its name every couple of decades. There's
The
one
anti-NDP
fear
parties.
that the anti-NDP party has, and that's that they'll split the vote. That's the only fear they have. We have got 70 years of uninterrupted. Everybody on the right comes together and decides to hate the left, and so they're afraid of that.
And now it's very interesting because the vote split this time was green, because that is what lost the BC Liberal Party a large amount of urban ridings, and this was not a playbook that the BC Liberals were prepared for. They fought the last battle.
Also
They fought
cost,
the
it also
2002.
cost the NDP ridings too.
That, yes, but who is premier?
Well,
Like, this
yeah,
is
no, fair point.
Well,
fair point.
they picked up two ridings, one of which was basically a tie, save for a few votes last time. That was
That was
Sandwich.
Gary Holman's riding, Sandwich North in the
that
Islands.
Adam Olsen is
But
now
Gary
representing. But that
Holman-
was basically
That was always a Green or a Liberal riding. It was just one electoral cycle that NDP picked it up.
But if you,
it
if you,
was yeah
if you
that
look,
and then
sorry, if you look at the ridings where the Greens experienced some of the highest gains, it was the ridings where the BC Liberals were experiencing some very substantial reductions in vote totals, and
False Creek.
there should be some hesitation about making these like one-to-one comparisons, but there are a group of, I would say, Gordon Campbell liberals, like the people who were in favor of the carbon tax and that kind of thing, who were urban and very disillusioned and felt left out of the, what the Christy Clark Liberal Party ended up being.
Yeah, and I've definitely heard those same kind of behind-the-scenes grumblings by urban BC Liberals who were looking at possibly jumping ship to the Greens going forward on a more permanent basis than just this last campaign. But that's, of course, going to depend on who gets to be the Liberal leader going forward. If it's someone from Metro Vancouver who speaks to those urban issues, I kind of see it shifting back a bit.
Or where the Greens end up going is it was really easy for the Greens to be the party of everybody when they were only, Andrew Weaver. But now that they're sort of a three-party caucus that has sort of a handle on power, where they end up going as a what I think will end up being a pro-environment, pro-business party that could appeal to the BC Liberals. But that might not be where they end up going. The Wild Rose at one point had very progressive policies on a number of things. The Reform Party had a number of very progressive policies on a number of things at the very early stages. But as soon as they got a bunch of MLAs, that made the party, and that changed everything. And so the BC Greens, where they go politically, is going to be really interesting to see.
So this leadership race and these rules have a number of stipulations. There's going to be debates in Vancouver, Surrey, Prince George, the Thompson Okanagan generally, Nanaimo. It literally says at a location in the Thompson Okanagan region, which I guess is Kelowna, Vernon, or Kamloops, or maybe Princeton.
The South Fraser, I think, elects the BC
right,
leader.
the Princeton debate, that'll be great.
Yeah.
Literally the amount of attendees, the hangers-on for the candidates would overwhelm the town.
Interestingly, it also says Nanaimo and a location designated by the Indigenous Network. Did they make a mistake not putting Victoria in there? Or is there anywhere else they should have put in
There's
there?
only
explicitly?
one riding in Victoria that they win regularly, and they'll never lose it.
But
So do they need to go to Victoria?
Well, but since the vote is weighted by riding, it actually matters more.
But if you move a debate there, you're going to support the candidate that is the urban candidate.
Yeah, not only that, Nanaimo's much more central on the island. You'll get people
Also a
traveling
good point.
from Victoria and up island there, and it kind of serves as the nexus of Vancouver Island in a lot of ways.
Fair enough.
So
And
it made sense. And plus, Victoria's the capital. Nobody wants to hold a debate there. It's all going to be party.
It's a sick culture, I believe. A sick culture, is that Christy Clark's line?
No, that was pretty close.
Yeah.
That's why she was never there.
Although in fairness, BC's political culture, especially in the legislature, toxic.
Accurate.
This is also only the required official events.
Yeah.
There will undoubtedly be others. Do you think there's anything else that was missed? Should there be more in the north or rural? Like, there's Prince George, the Thompson Okanagan. There's nothing in Fraser Valley.
Well,
unless you count Surrey, which is a real
Surrey
reach.
counts as the Fraser Valley, and it'll be in South
Does
Surrey.
it?
It'll be South Surrey, which is very geographically close in terms of the highway coverage to Langley and Abbotsford. It'll be fine in terms of that. Surrey has a lot in common in terms of the Liberal supporters with Langley and Abbotsford in that area, and so that'll.
I mean, what is the point of these debates? The point of these debates is to expose as many Liberal members to one-on-one FaceTime with the candidates as possible. And putting them in Victoria compared to Nanaimo doesn't make a lot of sense to me because there are more BC Liberal members in Nanaimo and more engaged party. Like, actually, it's the density of members is more sensible to put it in, like, these certain, like in terms of absolute numbers, I don't necessarily know if it's true, but like
I have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
So you've been involved in these things a lot. I've been involved in these things a lot. I've never watched until this federal NDP leadership race. I've never watched a race where during the debates I didn't know who I was already supporting. Have you ever watched a debate for a party that you didn't know who you were already supporting?
No.
Yeah, and that's the federal NDP race right now is unique. I think in the realm of I don't know very many New Democrats other than the Nikki people who really know who they're supporting on the first ballot. And so these leadership races, like you were saying, they're not for party faithful. I think they're for the party adjacent, the people that might take out a membership, the people that might be your next foot soldiers if you can get them into the party. And so putting it in Surrey is a great idea because you've got 4 ridings you want to take back. Putting it in Nanaimo is great because there's ridings in that area that maybe could become in play one day.
And it's also a way to practice your key messages for the next campaign.
Yeah.
And Surrey's close enough to Vancouver that those people who are so desperate to watch 2
Get on the Sky
BC
train.
Liberal leadership race debates can see them. And undoubtedly multiple people in this room will go to those because that's the kind of people who are here.
Not Super Bowl people.
Not well.
So much.
So Super Bowl's not till early February, right? It's till
Yeah.
February 4th or whatever it was going to be, February 3rd. I don't care. Because if I do care about football, I'll care about CFL because Canadian, right?
Really?
Patriotism.
Yeah.
I've watched some CFL.
Wait,
games
are
in
you
my
the
time.
only
No.
person in Canada who prefers CFL to NFL?
I know. Sorry, you're aware of Saskatchewan, right?
Okay,
Like-
sorry. Are you the only person that doesn't call it a bunny hug that supports NFL over CFL?
I was not expecting this to be the most divisive topic of the
Regionalism.
My question was going to be jumping off of that based on the date of the Liberals aren't choosing their leader till early February. What does that mean for the BC NDP government as it stands right now and the Greens in their weird sort of opposition but also supporting the government on key bills position? Anyone who wants to jump
Well,
in.
it means they got a little breathing room.
Yeah, I mean, I think John Horgan actually used the phrase "breathing room." I think John Horgan, if anything, is a breath of fresh air in that he's willing to say, he's actually just willing to say things like, well, that gives us some breathing room politically. Yeah, strategically speaking, that's pretty good for us. I gotta admit.
It's not a bad thing.
Like, I actually kind of like how he is the only person the only politician I've ever seen that has no filter when it comes to actually saying the real. And he literally was like, yeah, we got
Have you met Donald Trump?
Okay. Let's not.
Oh, sorry, you said the real.
Let's not compare.
Okay.
But like he literally said, and you're right. It gives us some breathing room because there's now a 2-vote advantage. They don't have, a couple of people can go off on a junket, or somebody can, God forbid, have the flu or something like that without failing the government outright. I think that's, you've got 6 months of that from the moment at which Christy Clark resigned before the election has to be called, and then another 6 weeks before that election result is in. So you basically eat yourself until the end of the spring session.
And,
Yeah,
then, and then the question becomes which party is going to be the first to wheel their MLA in on a stretcher to cast a vote.
Which actually happened in the '79.
Oh yeah, no, I'm saying this will
that's
happen.
like you're not joking. Yeah.
Well,
and it gives the NDP Greens a chance to govern and to do some good things, and probably also to reveal some of their weaknesses, which is probably going to be good for the BC Liberal race because it gives them something to oppose. They're not just opposing a party that's only just come into power and is sort of in that honeymoon phase.
And good for good for the Liberals too, because they were going to need to engineer periods where they didn't have their full caucus there and pretend, oh, we're really sorry that Simon Gibson didn't make it on the ferry. Unfortunately, it was a mistake. We would love to take down the government now and go into an election, but unfortunately, he wasn't here. It means that they get a chance to actually sit back, yell, and scream without having to actually take down a government while they go through a leadership race.
So if Christy Clark gone, it gives them an option to run all the leadership campaign without having to vote against them on everything and risk taking down the government. And on the Liberal side, 6 months is a fairly short leadership campaign. It's about the shortest they could reasonably push it without really compressing it too much.
Actually, I used to think that, but Naylor, you said it. That seems to be the way of things for the party.
2011 was relatively short because Gordon Campbell resigned in, I want to say October or November or something like that, and we were going to a leadership campaign in mid-February, late February, if I remember correctly. Like the compression isn't like it. I remember actually the NDP starting their campaign, then the BC Liberals starting their campaign, Christmas, and then the BC Liberals ending their campaign, me getting a job and moving to Victoria, and then the BC NDP ending their campaign like a month
Well,
later.
that also had another reason why you had to compress it, is because there was a premier slot
You need to
fill.
have a premier.
And
Yeah.
for an opposition campaign,
But even
It's-
compare the federal NDP with the federal Conservative Party. The federal Conservative Party leadership race was very short, and
took the better part of a year.
Yeah, but remember the federal NDP leadership race for Mulcair? That was, I think, 18 months. And then where Mulcair
It's
won it.
still ongoing.
And then I'm talking about the one where Mulcair won it. And now we're
to
looking.
replace Mulcair.
Now we're looking at the replacement Mulcair. Mulcair resigned, I think, on election night.
No, he didn't.
Oh no,
No,
he
no,
didn't.
stuck
He had to be
around.
forced
Are you
out.
really forgetting this?
I tried to, and then he was forced out in Edmonton like over a year ago, and
He should have resigned on election
Well, yes,
night.
but anyways.
He got booted unceremoniously.
Yes.
At the
But
convention
the thing
in
is that
February,
I think
and
the
we're still waiting for him
the,
to leave.
The NDP seemed to like
No
to have
offense.
extremely long leadership races. The right of center parties seem to have very short ones.
Well-
you look at the Conservative leadership race federally was relatively short.
This
Well,
last
it's-
one wasn't. That's
Yeah,
right.
they announced the
Wasn't
first
it-
candidates announced early summer 2016, and we didn't have a leader till May
Oh, yeah,
of
you're right.
2017.
No, you're right. That was about a
think,
year. Yeah.
I do think the BC NDP though, when Glenn Clark resigned, because
Are we going back that far?
well,
I was
how
in
ma-
high school.
How many were there? When he resigned, there was an interim leader for a while.
Dan Miller.
Dan Miller, who I always forget, like that extra BC NDP premier that.
There's
no
been
one
5
remembers.
of them now,
Yeah, if you count him.
if you can.
And then they finally settled on Ujjal Dosanjh, who got to handle the sinking ship.
Good
Well,
health minister.
I mean,
I met him. He's a great guy, but
Yeah.
he got given a sinking ship.
But Dan
so
Miller was only premier, I think, for about 6 months, wasn't he? I'd have to check.
He had to deal with that whole leadership
Yeah.
race.
But it was a
So-
relatively short leadership race there
It was
because
long enough
there was a
that-
premiership on the line. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
good point.
So that one was extended. But getting back to the topic at
Sorry.
hand, no, this is a good diversion. That's why we're here tonight.
Sorry, what was the topic?
The topic at hand is the BC Liberal
Is
leadership.
blocking
and what
the
it does
NDP
mean.
is, I
So
think, what it is.
it gives the BC NDP a bit of breathing room. But one of the things I've noticed, even sort of since Christy Clark essentially just vanished from public life, is she sort of like she had her I'm resigning, and then it was I guess this will be my last public statement. We haven't heard from her since. Honestly, has anyone?
But I think that's the mark of a good former leader, to be honest.
Well,
I don't want to give her a lot of credit because I don't think she was a good premier. But I actually think the mark of a good former leader is to leave and allow the thing to happen. You guys talked earlier about how it's only the NDP former leaders who seem to get involved, and I think that's actually a good point.
And if Christy Clark will do anything, it will be the thing that is good for the party. At least in her mind.
you were not sarcastic.
Wait, wait, wait,
No,
wait.
I'm not.
Okay.
What's the
Sorry,
what's
you
the
sounded
overlap?
a bit.
What's the
but
overlap
I just
between
wanna be-
Christy Clark and the party? Is it 1-to-1 overlap, or is it?
Yeah, I think it was today's BC Liberals or Christy Clark's BC Liberals. It was like the premier was very
There's a
was
lot
like
of things we could add here.
extremely partisan, and I think didn't have a lot of things that she really wanted to do once she got the power. She just
Yeah.
enjoyed like using it.
Yeah,
So-
actually, no. Like that's I think the most accurate assessment you could possibly have. of it.
Like I know that she really liked the Bennetts, and it
Yeah.
she one of her closest advisors was Brad Bennett.
The third.
Brad Bennett is the son of Bill and the other Bennett,
Right.
who was also named Bill. Was it Bill?
It's William,
A lot
then
of Bill
Bill.
Bennett.
It's William
Yeah.
Anderson, Cecil Bennett, then Bill Bennett, then Brad Bennett.
Yeah, so wacky Bill, Brad, the Bennetts, and Christy Clark was very, very like enamored with what Wacky Bennett did, and I know that there was like some BC Liberal culture that had the Time magazine cover that had Wacky Bennett on it that said, Canada's secret boom, or Canada the boom that nobody noticed. She really bought into that idea of like trying to build stuff to build BC, and
Interesting.
in a kind of manner that like brings to mind Robert Moses, for people who are
Oh man!
urban planners. There are
Obscure reference.
Well, I
point
think
for the night,
yeah.
but
so. I think the thing is that Wacky Bennett had an obsession with mega projects in the Peace River region and other areas, and and Bill Bennett, his son, also did too. And I think you're right that
But
Chrissy,
he also
Chrissy
built us a
similarly,
few, like-
but Chrissy similarly also wanted to build Site C Dam, which it seems like is going to go ahead based on today's reports. But like she had her only real thing was this Site C Dam, I think, and the Massey Tunnel Bridge.
and the giant stupid bridge.
Yeah, that never should have been built, and won't be built now, hopefully.
There
Anyways.
needs to be a new crossing there, whether or not it needs to be
Does there?
10 lane. Yeah,
Let's get into that in another podcast.
yeah,
the
that's a
tunnel.
big-
Whoa,
tunnel
whoa.
needs replacing.
Let's get into
But
that in another podcast.
a
I got a
10-lane mega
bunch
bridge is
of
probably not
comments. I think we're supposed to talk about the leadership race that's coming up, though.
Woo!
Is that
Well, that's
it?
what we were basically talking about. Well, the rules, and we've covered the rules pretty well. One of the things I've noticed is no one's paid attention to Rich Coleman for how long has he been interim leader?
It's true.
Good, excellent. The
I think-
best.
I
it's
actually-
like the best thing that he could be doing.
I
The
actually
best
think-
thing. So Andrew Weaver has been in the news multiple times, sort of opposing the NDP government or presenting alternate visions, like on Uber sort of ride-sharing stuff, talking about minimum wage.
He's carving himself out as a bit pro-business environmentalist. He's supporting
Weaver.
Uber, the disrupting company that deregulates everything to do with employee workforce protections as well as consumer protections. He's supporting not going to $15 minimum wage because he doesn't think that he thinks it'll hurt small businesses. He's carving himself out as a I think that the phrase, what was the phrase, Scott, you used earlier that I loved?
Tories with bikes.
Tories with bikes. And he's carving himself out as the environmentalist that likes business. And I think that works for him. I think that absolutely works for his voter base. I think that works for him expanding his base beyond 3 seats. I think that's good. But also it's very, very sexy for the media to focus on the infighting between him and Horgan.
Yeah.
It's not sexy to focus on the things that Rich Coleman is talking about.
But also, like from the perspective of someone who is like looking at leadership campaigns, it's not Rich Coleman's place to be setting the direction of the party.
Sure.
Like that.
Yeah.
That is a process that now is in the hands of BC Liberal members, which is an exciting exercise in democracy, and so there is going to be a debate within the party about what this is about, and also John Horgan hasn't introduced any legislation, and so there isn't much to concretely oppose. Beyond that, you shouldn't get in the way of your opponents when they are in the middle of trying to, shoot themselves in the foot or tear each other's throats out. So I think that Rich Coleman is doing exactly what he should be doing as a partisan actor.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see when the legislature resumes. But as far as a interim leader, I think actually Rona Ambrose probably set a really good role model on how to do that.
She
agreed.
Opposed, but not too harshly. Didn't really change the direction of the party.
I think she did. I think she reset the party as a party that smiles, and a party that actually cares about people. And I think that was the party's biggest negatives, and she did a really good job of that as interim. It's unfortunate that Andrew Scheer is not necessarily following up on that.
I have many opinions.
But I actually think that Ron Ambrose did a great job of taking the negatives of the party and making them positives while waiting for the leadership race.
Yeah, she definitely smoothed the edges off the party during the leadership race while she was interim leader.
And probably a lot of the leadership that happens if you're interim leader is happening behind closed doors. You're trying to bring people back together after losing an election. That's hard. You're trying to keep people together during a leadership race. That's hard. And it's not really something you want to be airing on the media. So while it may look like nothing's happening, I'm sure there's lots going on.
So while we're on the subject, I guess, of federal politics, let's transition into the second big, broad-ranging topic we want to talk to you guys with, and that's sort of shuffling the chairs at the federal level. So this past week we saw Justin Trudeau announce sort of a cabinet shuffle. He invented a new position, as in he split apart the Indigenous Affairs Department into a sort of deal with sort of federal Indigenous relations and reconciliation kind of position, and a more just service, like providing money to Indigenous peoples and creating a second department for that, as had been called for in a report, I guess, 20 years ago from one of the Indigenous studies. As
the wheels of bureaucracy run particularly slowly, apparently, when it comes to Indigenous affairs. The fact that was a report that was tabled in 1996, I think, and there are people. I think there's somebody I follow on Twitter. His name's Alex Usher. He's a luminary in AVED policy, post-secondary policy. His father, I think he said, helped write that report. And he's now relatively not old. I don't want to say old just in case he listens to my podcast. But he's up there in terms of being in his late 30s, early 40s. And his dad helped write a report that got followed through on today.
And then I guess the other big news this week was Andrew Scheer announced his Shadow Cabinet. So, which has all kinds of interesting sort of who gets what in terms of a leadership race. But let's start with the Trudeau announcement. There wasn't a ton of sort of deck changing. It's hard to say if it's a full cabinet shuffle.
I liked Paul Wells is always my go-to when it comes to federal politics, and I'm probably going to reference him a few times today. But Paul Wells said that Trudeau has embraced the medium-sized cabinet shuffle. The question always used to be, is this going to be a minor cabinet shuffle or a major cabinet shuffle? And no one really has ever had a consistent pattern of medium cabinet shuffles prior to what appears to be Justin Trudeau's pattern. And now you've got every shuffle here happens to be 6 or 7 people moving around. Some people coming up, some people getting out, some people moving around. Whereas a minor cabinet shuffle is 2 or 3, and a major cabinet shuffle is 10. He's the only one that does a medium cabinet shuffle.
So what do we think of this idea of splitting the Indigenous Affairs Department in half?
In my gut, that feels right. Like it feels like if we're going to have this dual relationship with Indigenous people and Indigenous peoples, there has to be a nation-to-nation relationship with the peoples, plural, and a service provider relationship with the people, singular.
Can I asterisk this service provider element? I think there's the nation-to-nation element, and then there's also the treaty obligation element. And I think that the Indigenous Affairs Minister has a treaty obligation to a host of things, including education, healthcare provision, and a host of other things. And the federal government has been woefully inadequate on all of them, spending far less on education for Indigenous peoples than any provincial government spends on its own people, and so on and so forth. To the immediate chagrin of all of those stupid internet memes that say that we spend way more. But I do like what Naylor said, is that Matthew says the right thing, is that, having the minister in charge of treaty obligations and the minister in charge of making a new deal and making a new relationship is, I think, I actually think a positive step forward, potentially.
Do you think...
It's really interesting to see like this acknowledgement that part of the problem and the reason that we haven't had more progress on this file is rooted in the organization of the government and itself. And I think it's exciting. It's interesting to see that there's that willingness to try something new. I'd be interested to hear a little bit more from Indigenous leaders to hear what they think.
Do we think any of this is a sign that, I think it was Carolyn Bennett was in the role?
She still is
in one of the roles, hasn't been successful in that? Do we think it's the sort of a sign that because one of the big criticisms of the Trudeau Liberals in their first term, and we're saying first term because I think most people are sort of in this like, yeah, they're going to win again because...
We don't vote out governments. we don't vote in new governments. We vote out old governments.
So one of the criticisms has been this, specifically on, for example, the missing murdered Indigenous women inquiry that hasn't really progressed and has just really taken a lot of heat for sort of spinning its tires, having trouble dealing with like families who are affected by this, like, and not taking in input, and meanwhile spending a lot of money doing no one really knows what. So is this a sign the Liberals have sort of been failing at their promise to implement every step of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission?
I don't think it's a sign of failure necessarily, but I do think it speaks to a desire to move faster. And one of the big criticisms we hear about Trudeau's government is that he hasn't really changed any policy. He doesn't have any policy to sort of to speak to quite yet, and he's halfway through his mandate. So this is one of his big promises, and it needs to happen before the next election, I would think, or needs to see some progress there. So maybe by having two really excellent ministers and splitting the file into two, you can get some progress a little faster.
I definitely agree. I think it's also the ministry, as it has always been, sort of destroys people. You get stuck in the problems, and I think that splitting it off, Carolyn Bennett is going to focus on the things that ministry has always been. But it seems like the Trudeau ministry likes ministers who are willing to move forward and think outside the box, and Jane Philpott has been that. And her moving into this role, I don't know what the ceiling has been placed on her is. I think she may have been, and I'm quoting Paul Wells because he's sort of my go-to. She may have been given the okay to think big on what is reconciliation, what is a nation to nations support, what is support and reconciliation and relationship. And I think what that comes out as, it could be a lot of things. And the one thing that I've heard bandied about is potentially actual federal government transfers similar to provincial transfers to Indigenous groups. And I think that's on the table, is what I would think, based on the idea of splitting this off into somebody who's going to renegotiate a new relationship. It may not happen and it may not be real, but I think that this government cares about it. I think Justin Trudeau, for as much as I will mock him for his shallowness on other policy levels, I think on Indigenous issues, I think he's real, and I hope it goes well.
Yeah, we'll have to see, but there's been definitely a few of those cabinet positions that have gotten progressively less ambitious as they go forward, notably democratic reform,
where ministers go to die.
So, okay, but before we leave the Indigenous Affairs portfolio, I think that, to be honest, this seems more like a vote of confidence in Carolyn Bennett than anything else. I think that she has been pushing for a very, very long time within the party to be a voice for a new conceptualization of the relationship between the government and Indigenous peoples, and she has spoken to she thinks about this very, very philosophically. She spoke in favor of the monarchism resolution, against the monarchism resolution, which was in favor of the monarchy at the 2012 Liberal Convention, because of how
at the Liberal Convention there was a monarchism resolution.
That's the most liberal thing ever.
Yeah. So
what was the resolution? Sorry to derail you, but I need to know this.
Okay, so the resolution was to set up a committee to examine whether or not Canada should maintain ties with the monarchy in the future.
You had a Republicanism motion.
Yes, did
it pass?
No, apparently this came out at the NDP debate in Quebec. It was like, do you support the monarchy? And they're all like, eh.
Which
is the most
That's the most Canadian response possible.
But before
the Liberal thing.
The Liberal one, this is the same resolution, like they were right after the other. Pro-monarchy, pro-marijuana, pro weed,
Good stances.
pro the Windsors. Like it's
I reject one of those.
the Crown and cannabis. It's like the liberal way.
You should listen to Pod Keep Our Land for more of these jokes.
Put it on a
like
t-shirt.
this.
I'll keep our land, the crown and cannabis.
So she like is thinking about this like in a very like philosophical way, in a way that I think is important for a minister to be considering these two things. And Jane Philpott is like a heavy hitter when it comes to running a very complicated service delivery ministry, because she has the chops to deal with like a area where the government has unequivocally failed over the past. Which is service provision to
Of health.
Health.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
she was health
she
minister.
was health
And-
minister. She was health minister now.
Until
the
she
thing-
got moved. And as health minister, she handled renegotiating health accord
all 10
with
provinces.
every province individually.
Including Manitoba, where the Premier of Manitoba said he would wait forever before signing on.
She did
and
that.
that apparently means 7 months.
She also was health minister, I believe, as the assisted dying legislation came in, which is a radical overhaul of our health system.
There's one
So,
really interesting
full credit
thing.
to her for
There's one
managing all that.
Yeah, one
I don't
really.
agree with how the Liberals eventually brought in assisted dying, but she managed it.
Yeah, there's one really interesting thing that I keep finding about the Trudeau cabinet handling is you can fail out of that cabinet and you can succeed up fast. That is rare in Canadian government. In Canadian government, normally, if you are a not so great cabinet minister from an area that's really important, you're there forever, and you're going to be in a pretty high cabinet position.
Although
Alberta had this guy named Guy Boudelier who happened to represent the area around Fort McMurray, and he was given relatively high-profile cabinet positions all the time because that was an important riding to keep. And he just was awful. He was a terrible cabinet minister, but he was still there for years and years and years. And that's pretty much the norm. The Trudeau cabinet seems to be one where you get in on merit. So Trudeau seems to have looked at himself and said, I don't want anyone else like me. I want to make sure everyone around me got here on merit, because God knows I know how I got
And
here.
let's just emphasize, on merit, but he still got a gender diverse cabinet.
Which is
full credit to the
yes.
Liberal team and him saying these are important things. So credit to him.
So like and speaking to that like meritocracy thing and regionalism, Kent Hare, who was the Minister of Veterans Affairs and also the Associate Minister of National Defense, has become the Minister of Sport and Disabilities.
Yeah.
And there has been some of this other shuffling that has gone on. Carla Qualtrough has
moved up
to Public Works. Like Ken Hare has basically been put on probation, and I don't really think it's entirely his fault because the government has continued litigating a really absurd Veterans Affairs case that they shouldn't be litigating anymore, and they should just settle. But he had to carry that water, and so they have hung him out to dry, kind of like they did with Stéphane Dion over the Saudi arms deal.
That's a really good point, is the idea that this government may not be able to recognize very effectively the idea that if you're in a ministry where we're not paying attention to, but you're doing a pretty good job while being, not given anything worthwhile, you're still doing a good job. And that's actually a really good point, is that ministries oftentimes have to be bad news bears, and if you're really good at that, you're still looking pretty bad.
I have a number of family members who live in Calgary and who work with people with disabilities and who know Kent Hare personally. I've never heard a bad thing about Kent Hare from anyone on any side of the political spectrum. So for him to get a quote-unquote demotion, it's just like
maybe they're
necessarily
seeing
deserve it, but
the
it's
good things that they're seeing the good things that cabinet ministers that get support do, but they're not seeing the ways in which cabinet ministers that are unsupported are carrying water for them.
Yeah. And Veterans Affairs is one of those ministries, like Indigenous Affairs,
no
one ever does well in it.
No, because the way that we handle Veterans Affairs is actually immoral to our country.
And it's going to go poorly for Seamus O'Regan, who's the new Minister of Veterans Affairs, unless the Trudeau government decides to change its tack on certain policy
And
issues.
actually treat veterans with fairness.
But then again,
that would go against like 20 years of precedent.
the Trudeau government has to protect Kent now because he's the last Liberal MP in Calgary.
In Calgary, yeah.
Because the other one turned out to be...
Well, he resigned today in disgrace from the caucus.
From
He's
caucus.
still
He's
staying
still
as
an
an
MP.
MP. We'll see where that goes.
Do you guys think that the media puts too much emphasis on this idea of, getting lower profile ministry as a demotion? I can just imagine, like, if you work in that ministry, how does that feel? If you read in the newspaper that, being the minister of your ministry is less desirable than...
But at the same time, some ministries are more important than others.
But
Canada,
here's the thing: is what is and isn't an important ministry
Well,
is
I
I think wildly dissociated in the eye of the public from the eye of the government. So, for example, in the eye of the provincial government in BC, regardless of party, this is a non-partisan issue. Post-secondary education is viewed as a lower tier ministry, not a middle tier ministry, not a higher tier ministry, a lower tier ministry. I think it's been given a bit of a middle tier treatment by the latest government with who they put in it, but it's still not a middle or an upper tier ministry. I think that if we were all to talk about is university and college and technical institutes and advancement, is that important? I think if I were to ask for a show of hands, I think I'd probably see a fair number of them.
I think there's critical, there's important, and there's things we may be able to do without. And sports probably falls into that latter category.
I don't think
finances
Well, the
at
people
the
with
top.
disabilities are looking
Yeah,
at
a
lot of people with disabilities.
that's the category.
And hold on, because sport,
It's not just
like
counter-
Kent is a good choice for this.
Sport
because
sounds-
Calgary is going to bid for the Olympics.
Well,
like this is
Please don't.
I agree.
Can we not spend billions of dollars?
Oh my God!
Oh no!
The wet blanket party
Okay.
is against the Olympics.
technically a lot
Okay,
better.
surprise.
We'll get into the that at a later pod. Keep our land. But I think the thing is that the idea of junior ministries where you cut your teeth is a little offensive to some people. And I think that's fair to say. I also think it's fair to say that there are ministries that, like you say, like transportation is a vitally important ministry that does way more than disability does. Now, that being said, disability is life or death for people, legitimately. And so that's still a super important ministry.
Yeah,
And I think
and
a
like the
mistake-
disabilities side's definitely, I think, more critical than the sports side of that ministry.
Well, and I think a mistake Trudeau made potentially was to sort of break every position into a full ministry.
Yeah.
Because one of the things when he became prime minister was no one's a sort of parliamentary, there weren't
Ministers of State. was
minister
what
of state, that was the
Yeah.
position. Sort of these sub-ministries, which were, important bits, but were subservient to a certain broader category, however you want to frame it. And there are sort of the big headings of what government does and what we pay attention to. We pay attention to finance, we pay attention to infrastructure, we pay attention to a couple other things, foreign affairs, for example. But under each of those, there are different things that people do. And how Trudeau went, he was like, well, I want to make sure there's equal number of men and women, and I want to make sure, he kind of tried to flatten it. But in flattening it, you kind of go, well, there's things people will pay attention to, and by people I mean sort of the broad public, the media will pay attention to. And, what they do in sports and people with disabilities, I pay a lot of attention to when I'm at my job that involves people with disabilities at the Cerebral Palsy Association. But other agencies, I'll pay no attention to. And that sort of varies. So it is a junior ministry in some sense, in that it used to be sort of under someone else, and it sort of belongs sort of maybe under the Ministry of Health, Minister of Culture, those two kind of things. And his sort of flattening misrepresents like what the media attention will be.
So I had a boss some time ago who thought we should just get rid of all the ministers and and have a ministry of money in, a ministry of money out, a ministry of crown responsibilities, and the premier. So
This is the most like, this is the very conservative end of the BC Liberals, right?
yes.
This is just how it works. Money come in, money go out.
So like things
Scrooge
like,
McDuck theory of government.
things like
I swim in my currency.
That's why we have a $2.7 billion surplus, actually. That was the plan if they'd won
No,
re-election.
once the debt's paid off.
Oh, yeah.
the reason we have a surplus is because like the coins
Because
have
you-
enough air in them that we can swim through. Life
Sorry.
is like a hurricane.
So, we should get to
We got
the
really
conservative-
no,
we
but
should
there
we
is
should
like
get to the conservative things. at
Absurd
some point.
ministries, go for it.
Okay, so I'm like there is like the crown. This actually divides the crown responsibility part away from the money out part of Indigenous Affairs, because there is a nation to nation part of this, and that there is a provision of services part like health and education and human resources and skills development, as opposed to the money in ministries like fisheries and forestry and agriculture and
Petroleum products.
petroleum. The
No,
ministry.
I prefer to call it digging things out of the ground and burning it.
Well, okay, so I'm just going to go with, as a closer to this, the most absurd ministry that has ever existed in BC's history, the Ministry of Energy and Mines and Natural Gas and Housing and Liquor and Gaming and Housing. And now he's leader of the opposition.
But yes,
Bad.
ministerial portfolios are fairly weird and arbitrary, is what it comes down to.
But let's talk about the shadow ministers.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
what I was going to
Speaking
jump
of
I've been
weird and
dying to get
I
into
feel like
this.
we've spent
We've
more than
spent
enough time
tens
on
of minutes
Twitter.
on it, which is the equivalent to the number of followers we have.
Yeah.
You should listen to Podkeeper on it.
So, I'm less interested personally in like who got what in Andrew Scheer's Shadow Cabinet than in the sort of like intra-party politics of like so and so was a former leader,
Yeah,
or
which-
leadership candidate.
Yeah,
Let's say.
which house is rising and falling within the
Yeah.
party? Like which philosophical
It's the Game of
name?
Thrones. It's the game of
the
conservative
Lannisters
Thrones.
and the-
They're calling their bannermen. I understand.
So
Uh,
we saw, I think Lisa Raitt got a pretty prominent initial position in their first round of announcements, but now in the Who Gets Shadow Cabinet, Bernier was apparently really wanting finance. He
he's publicly said he wanted.
Just
it.
a terrible
Which
thing
is-
to do.
No,
If you actually
never
want to
happened.
go
He
forward.
not even just like implied he wanted it. He literally told a reporter, "I would like finance."
Not
Yeah,
done.
it would be one thing if he said, I want to focus on the fiscal issues or something like that, which, everyone knows what he's talking about, but he didn't outright say, I want finance. But he actually outright said, I want
it's
finance.
a faux pas because Max Bernier does not follow politics as usual.
Like if I were leader and someone asked for the thing, I feel like I couldn't give it to them.
Because it would look like it was favoritism.
So he didn't get it.
capitulating
Yeah.
to a.
Well, and he didn't get it for a number of reasons. Yeah.
Well, he has this hyper-libertarian viewpoint,
Yeah.
and he also ran on the abolish supply management, which Scheer ran on the exact opposite of
Yeah.
save supply management. Everyone should have to pay $3 more on milk than Americans do.
I'm just sorry. I just love how supply management is like a truly non-partisan issue because
Sorry.
there are people who are
Matthew,
absolutely.
can you please explain in 5 seconds or less what supply management is?
Supply management is the government telling the agricultural producers how much they can produce and then buying it all.
All right.
Wow.
So
All right.
it's price fixing.
Yeah.
Faster. Bernier was given innovation, science, and economic development, and has also pledged not to bitch about supply management anymore, which seems like, considering he was the leading conservative candidate until the final round when he lost. And what was fantastic for me personally, because I'm not a conservative, was being in Alberta at my dad's 60th birthday, surrounded by conservatives, because it was my dad's 60th birthday. So I had all his friends and rural Albertan in-laws and friends of family being like, have you checked who's winning the race? Because
Yeah. Because you can check.
Because I kept
check.
hitting refresh
Yeah.
on my phone to find out. And they were like, oh, Bernier's still in the lead. That's okay. They were all actually pretty excited for Bernier to win. And then they were kind of like surprised. They weren't dairy farmers.
He may have still won. They did delete all the ballots like 8 hours later.
It was surprisingly weird.
Yeah.
Did anyone go back and check the tape they had of the ballot room?
It was not allowed.
So, Patrick, conspiracy.
My tinfoil hat is firmly placed.
Conspiracy theory. Anyway, they were very excited that Bernier was leading and kind of like, oh, who's Scheer? When he won. Which is weird because Scheer was the Prairie candidate. Anyway, Bernier's now Innovation, Science, Economic Development. Chong was given Infrastructure, Communities, and Urban Affairs.
Which is probably a pretty smart choice. Like, you can't put him in environment because his main message was very much opposed to what the current leader is. But he does well in urban areas.
I think that was a good decision.
Yeah. Steve Blaney, I think, was also running for Canada.
Yes.
Leadership. Yes.
Yeah.
He got Veteran Affairs. It's hard to remember all 14, right? Yeah. Anyway, Blaney got Veteran Affairs, which is kind of a...
It's a softball. He's going to get to yell a lot.
Erin O'Toole got Foreign Affairs.
That actually rounds out Erin O'Toole. Erin O'Toole is a bit of a spiritual successor to Andrew Scheer, and giving him Veteran Affairs rounds him out a little bit. It also is really rewards the Atlantic Canada area because they have a lot of veterans because they don't have a lot of economy.
Although O'Toole, I believe, is in Ontario MP.
Is he?
He is in Ontario.
Oh man,
MP.
I swore he was at Mass.
No. He went to Dalhousie.
Yeah,
he went to Dalhousie.
Yeah,
there we go.
He went to Dalhousie and was posted to Greenwood. So he spent a lot of time in the Maritimes.
Okay,
but
there we go.
He is an Ontario MP, but I agree Foreign Affairs is a good spot for him.
And also, like, he seems to have a bit of a head on his shoulders, and so I admire that. I also appreciate Bernier saying that he's going to shut up about supply management because we are in the midst of a very, very complicated and treacherous NAFTA renegotiation. Like, aside from the absolutely repulsive thing that Scheer was doing with Rempel and Kent down in the States, bad-mouthing their own country, this is an opportunity for the Conservative Party to glimmer with patriotism by not undermining their trade agenda for their own nation.
I'll give full credit to the Conservatives for giving Scott Reid democratic institutions because during the Electoral Reform Committee hearings, he proved himself over and over again to be fully open to actually looking at he proved himself to be more open to looking at electoral reform than Justin Trudeau is apparently. So full credit to Scott Reid. Glad to see he still gets to shout at the wind, scream at the wind. I
think it buys him some credibility. So.
Yeah. And the most controversial of all of the appointments here is finance, where Pierre Poilievre was given the credit position.
Can I ask everybody listening right now, can you please Google image search Pierre Poilievre and the word polo? Because he went to no less than 20 or 30 Government of Canada funding announcements wearing a blue polo that had the Conservative Party of Canada logo on it to announce that he was giving money on behalf of from taxpayers, Government of Canada money, to different infrastructure projects over the course of the year leading up to the election. That is, if not one of the most brazen acts of contempt for government money that has ever occurred in Canadian history. I cannot understate how bad that was.
Yeah, this is, I think, by far the most partisan take of the lot here.
Yeah,
and on
he also has atrocious choice in hair. His haircut is brilliantly bad.
I just Googled imaged it. Yeah, you're right, 100%.
Oh, it's bad. Pierre Poilievre, if you want to look up on video his House of Commons statements, they are atrocious as well. This is a man who has made his politics out of the politics of hating the other guy. The classic Republican trope of, I don't care what I'm going to do when I get into power, as long as I hate the other guy. That is this man.
So do you think that's strategic on the part of the leader? Does he want to point out the federal Liberals' weakness in terms of finance? Is that where they're going to try and
No,
get some ground?
I don't know, because the thing is, I'm not sure Pierre Poilievre knows how the government's budget works, despite having been in government for 10 years.
I think there's a good chance he doesn't,
Minister
but
of National Revenue at one point.
Yes,
Like,
he was, but I don't know if he knew how it worked.
I think this is a sign that they're planning on swinging hard and in a
Yeah.
very partisan manner on the finance issues,
Yeah.
and I don't know how well it's actually going to play.
It looks, everything about the Scheer government, and you've been complaining a lot about it there, Matthew, and I'm pointing at you, is that it looks like on every count they're going very hard right against this government.
Although
Wow, so-
not so hard right that they would have given Kelly Leach a slot. She
Oh,
was
but
one of the notable.
She self-immolated.
So Andrew Scheer, there are two takeaways that I have
Yes.
from this. One is that Andrew Scheer is assembling his team of weasels, and two is that they have decided to run the same playbook from the last election again, which is like economic conservatism, steady hand at the tiller, even though they're not at the tiller anymore, and also just a tiny bit of cultural conservatism, which I know
But-
that's
so
the term that's
that-
somewhat
that-
around.
When I think of Pierre Poilievre and finance, I do not think steady hand at the tiller. Is he really the right choice for that?
No, he's a
but
terrible choice.
He's like the attack dog. Like
Yeah.
this is the thing, is that like Andrew Scheer is running a model parliament party and not a national opposition.
Woof.
And-
Can we describe model parliament in 5 seconds or less? Because several of us have done it and none of us want to revisit it.
so imagine question period, but all the time.
That's well
19.
done.
That was pretty bad.
With 19-year-olds, yeah, that's well done. So the next one I think is that we were thinking of talking about was there's no Kelly Leach, like you guys said, or Brad Trost, which means that
But Brad Trost, I am seeing, and Campaign Life Coalition, is pretty happy.
wait, what?
Okay.
Yeah, this came up on National Post earlier today. They're fully endorsing Scheer's team. I guess maybe that's just in comparison.
Oh, so Brad Trost's
Which-
supporters.
Yeah,
Okay.
are happier with the Scheer et al. versus
So
the
Brad
Liberals
Trost.
and
So Brad
NDP.
Trost ran on a blatantly pro-life campaign,
Yeah.
a very pro-family values campaign. By the way, family values obviously being code for hating gay people.
Well, one of the big
Um,
things coming out, especially out of left-wing groups like Press Progress, is the status of women critic, and I can't pull her name up. I'm assuming they
Oh.
gave it to a woman because they're not
They
that
did.
dumb.
They did.
Do you
But
remember?
before we leave this, like you were
Yeah.
had something to say about Brad Trost, or
Oh yeah.
Oh,
Well,
sorry.
so I think there's a couple things happening here with leaving Brad Trost, who was 4th place in the leadership race, and
Yeah.
Kelly Leach, who was 6th place. So they did quite well amongst the many people who were in that leadership race, out of cabinet, and they're now sitting as backbenchers. It says something about Andrew Scheer sort of drawing a line in terms of what is going to be acceptable discourse when it comes to their social conservative values that they're going to be talking about, and what is not acceptable, or at least is not going to be, part of their core messaging. So that's part of what's going on. The other part of what's going on is it lets Leach and Trost say more of what they have a tendency to say, which leans more towards the racist and the homophobic and the anti-choice. So it gives them a little bit more freedom, right?
As backbenchers, they can say whatever the hell they want.
More freedom, but less volume.
Yeah.
And
so-
potentially even more freedom than Stephen Harper allowed, which was very little and only when it didn't matter.
Yeah.
It seemed to be like, oh, you brought forward a private member's bill that has no chance in hell of passing because I have all the controls of that. That lets your
Right.
anti-choicers be happy. The one thing that's come out, though, is the status of women critic is Rachel Harder, who's
Lethbridge.
Lethbridge
Yeah.
MP, first elected in 2015, who's basically spent her life, it sounds
Abortion,
like,
anti-abortion stuff,
basically,
yeah.
throwing money at anti-choice groups. So she's,
But I mean, this is in keeping with what we've seen from Scheer. Scheer has decided that the cultural war needs to continue because millennials will never vote in his mind, and old people will always vote, and eventually that will maybe not work, but for now it will work. And I think that's in keeping with his entire portfolio.
It's so ludicrous to me because it seems like they've decided to fight the last campaign as if it won.
Well, but the thing
government.
is, I said something at the very beginning of the leadership race with the Conservatives, and I've said it repeatedly since then, is that race felt like the 2006 Liberal leadership race. In 2006...
Conservative race?
The Conservative
the election.
the Conservative leadership race felt like the 2006 Liberal leadership race. Was a bunch of people came out of the woodwork that were former cabinet ministers, former Liberal, former party people that wanted to be the next government, and they thought it'd be a short job. They thought this guy was short term. They thought Canada would grow tired of him. They thought, and it's always a him in Canada because we suck. But they thought that
They grew tired of her pretty quick. Or the baggage of the party.
They thought that this was going to be a short term in the woodshed, and it didn't end up being that way. And I think that this is a party that thinks that they can fight the last race again. And that was the same thing in 2006 with the Liberal Party when they ran a leadership race with Ken Dryden and Bob Rae and Michael Ignatieff and Stéphane Dion was like some newcomers and a bunch of former cabinet ministers, just like now, is a party that thinks they're going to win again.
I'm sorry, what leadership race hasn't been some newcomers and a bunch of former cabinet ministers? Oh wait, NDP ones.
The most recent BC NDP race. Yeah, the most recent BC NDP race.
The most recent BC NDP race where...
I think the thing is that what you see is when you have 8 people on a stage in a leadership race or more, you have a party that doesn't know what its identity is. And the Conservatives did not define their identity in that leadership race, nor did the Liberals in 2006 when Dion won out of the blue. And I think that that's going to hold firm, is that the Conservatives still don't know what their identity is, and they don't know what a winning combo is, because they're going to keep running on that same angry, older, affluent, white campaign that they ran on for the last bunch of years.
Right. Yeah. So what we're hearing is that the top 3 issues that they're going to bring forward in the next session is just going to be hammering home this whole point about Omar Khadr and the settlement, the income sprinkling loophole that just got closed, and then the rise in the amount of asylum seekers coming to Canada. And so like you were saying, Patrick, this says to me, not interested in putting forward new ideas or a vision, more interested in maintaining this narrative around, this government is unfair towards so-called ordinary, I'm doing air quotes, Canadians, and with, not so subtle overtones of racism.
Yeah, stock, if you will.
Yeah.
But yeah, I more or less agree they've written off the millennials, and I know a fair number of right-leaning millennials who just see nothing in the sheer Conservative Party. And
rightfully so.
Yeah, and there is a version of the Conservative Party that could appeal to a decent chunk of millennials, but it's not this Conservative Party.
Well, they recognize where voter trends are, and they recognize that to appeal to young millennial right-wing voters, they have to alienate some of their older voters.
Well, it doesn't even have to be young millennials. The millennials are in their 30s now.
No. The thing is that old people vote in massive numbers.
So yeah, but the millennial demographic is, in theory, going to be the largest one.
They're afraid to let go.
Yeah.
It's not like people's voter turnout tends to increase as their age goes up.
Yeah, but the other one that we wanted to talk about, though, was also Michelle Rempel.
Yes, speaking of...
We really wanted to get into Michelle Rempel. Michelle Rempel, for those that don't know, Michelle Rempel has long been the moderate voice of the Conservative Party. She's from an urban Calgary riding. She has been a sort of the fashionable, the sensible. She's frequently come out on issues progressively. She has been on the forefront of women's issues for the Conservative Party, and lately she has come out very anti-immigration, and she was given the immigration critic portfolio.
Which absolutely, okay, two things on this. The meta thing is that demographically and like my upbringing and where I grew up, would tend to like lead me to be a little more conservative. The fact that I am gay and grew up in Alberta and was exposed to a lot of reform and progressive conservative opposition to like me being gay was one of the reasons that I decided to be like a Paul Martin-y business style liberal. And I think that Michelle Rempel, who now represents the riding that I grew up in, is like has taken that and expanded the like feelings of uncomfort to like way more people. Michelle Rempel represents a like fairly racially diverse part of Calgary, Edgemont, and Hawkwood, and like all these places that Calgary Neds Hill encompasses are relatively ethnically diverse. They have a large Pakistani population and Chinese population and Vietnamese population, and she has been on Facebook live every day.
She's turned fairly anti-immigrant, which is really interesting because her original shtick was being the progressive member of the party. And I followed her on Twitter for a long time. I really respected her for a long time based on that. And it's really interesting that she was given the immigration portfolio as the shadow cabinet critic, because I think that ends up actually being a sop to the Kelly Leaches, a sop to the Brad Trosts, a support to them saying, hey, you know, we have a young, a vibrant, a really good cabinet minister or a cabinet critic portfolio already given to that. We don't need to give it to Brad Trost or
just
Kelly Leach.
Play to the
I would
worst impulses.
put for a second though, Kelly Leach and Brad Trost did sort of take different angles because Kelly Leach is
she
sort
hates
of,
him.
Yeah.
And so does Brad. So does
they're in a
Scheer.
weird like.
But
Kelly Leach's version of Canadian values does not include Brad
Thomas
Trost for some reason.
Thomas Jefferson said that slavery was like holding a wolf by the ears. You don't want to let go, but you don't want to be holding him by the ears, but you don't want to let go. And I think that the Conservative Party views their Nazi wing of the party, their far right wing of the party, their anti-immigrant wing of the party, the
say the
same
alt-right.
way. They don't want to let go of that wing of the party because it's a voter base, but they also don't want to be holding on to it. And so they're holding Michelle Rempel in that role for that reason.
There's way too much to unpack in that statement tonight.
Especially as we're passing 11 p.m.
Yeah, we're now coming on to, I think, hour 3 of this, so why not you give us a quick where we can find you, and we'll move on to Q&A.
Actually, one thing that we do really, really quickly is we do a thing at the end of every one of our podcasts that's not political. We say,
let's do
hey,
that.
what are you doing that's not political that you're interested in? And I think it'd be really cool to do. So for me, I just finished, much like everybody else, Game of Thrones. And we had about 15, 20 people over at our apartment. And, oh man, I am excited for the next episode. So Game of Thrones is my thing.
Which is not for another like.
Who
18
knows
months.
how long? But to be
you're
honest, George R. R. Martin has been making me wait for how long for a book, so I'll take it.
Right and right faster.
Matthew.
Oh goodness! Normally I think about this a little beforehand, but
That's why I'm making you go now and not me.
oh my god.
You can always pass on.
Yeah, no,
I will
I'm gonna
cut
pass
this
for
and
just a
Anybody
second.
willing to raise a hand?
Matthew only listened or thought about politics all week.
No, it's true.
That's probably true.
What am I thinking about? I'm thinking about my upcoming trip to California. I'm heading to San Francisco pretty soon, so that's my
Nice.
non-political piece.
Anything exciting in San Francisco?
I'm heading to a Quaker wedding. I've never been to any sort of Quaker activities, but apparently there's no like minister or pastor who leads the ceremony. It's sort of co-created by everybody in the room. So I'm
Just
really
like
looking
accidentally
forward
by the end, there's a couple married.
to.
Hopefully you're not.
I don't know. I'll let you know when I find
Okay.
out.
All right, I figured it out.
Okay.
So I realized why I haven't been doing a lot of like non-political reading, and that's because I have been trying to organize a bunch of people to go up on the Fraser River because
Your birthday.
I'm turning 30 on Monday, so
Condolences.
I know.
Downhill from here.
It's all as if it hasn't been so far. No, I'm excited. I'm happy to spend a weekend with friends, and I think that going somewhere that doesn't have cell phone reception is pretty awesome because nothing is going to pop up on my phone over the weekend that says the president has done a thing.
So, Scott?
I've been thinking about the engineering challenges behind how you move 15 trillion gallons of water out of a place where the average slope is 0.016%.
Yep.
And there isn't a good answer to that.
No.
But that's basically Houston's problem right now.
Houston, we have a problem. You're right. That was way too soon.
It's like still happening.
Still there.
And it felt so right then.
And
So
Ian?
wrong. I'm also going to a wedding this weekend, but it's a more sort of traditional, but it's a non-religious wedding. I mean, in my day job with the Human Association, we're petitioning right now for the government to recognize the right for groups that aren't religious or hired by the government to perform
I signed your
weddings.
petition, by the way.
Thank you, Patrick.
I highly recommend everybody sign the petition. It's available at
bchumanist.ca. And so between sort of my trip to Edmonton for the weekend and just trying to figure out like what things do I see in Edmonton since I haven't been back there for, I mean, I've been back a couple times in the last 10 years, but haven't spent a lot of time. I'm going to go to the art museum, I think, so
nice.
that's what's on my mind.
I think it's really valuable to sometimes just take a step back from politics, which was Erin's advice at the very start of this podcast. So
I really like the conservatory in Edmonton. I think that every city should have a place where you can go and look at cool plants.
I lived in England for 2 years, and there were some fantastic ones there that were like absurdly built out of glass. I lived near Alexandra Palace, where they had like a fantastic glass museum, and Crystal Palace was the ideal version of that in the south end of London till it burnt down. But you know, glass conservatories. I think Belfast had a really good one too.
My favorite English collection of plants is the Poison Garden,
We're
which
going
has
down
all
the
of
really
my
deep-
favorite English collection of plants is the end of the podcast.
Okay. You can find Pod Keep Our Land anywhere you find podcasts. You can find us on Twitter. We're on Facebook. We have an email address, I think.
podkeepourland@gmail.com.
Please give us a listen.
podkeepourland@gmail.com.
We're a
We
brand new
would love
podcast. We need some more listeners. We need some
Also-
feedback.
We want
check us out.
to give a big thank you to Politicoast to inviting us out here. We understand that our tens of listeners are outstripped by their hundreds of listeners, if not thousands of listeners, and so we were really happy to be part of the 50th anniversary.
And thank you to the audience. This is pretty cool.
Yes,
that this all
it is
came out
really
on a
cool to
Thursday
be up
night.
here.
So.
Always happy when people I don't know show up to like events like this, where I'm like, you listen to me every week. That's not weird. Let's take a few questions with the.
Can I suggest
Well, 5
that
per-
there be maybe 2 questions to make us feel like we're powerful and cool, and no more? Maybe 1 question.
Let's play it by ear. I don't know. Let's see how it goes.
I see one.
What are the other podcasts we should be listening to?
What are your favorite podcasts? Let's start it. You're in. Matthew. What do you listen to?
Wait.
Yeah, what am I listening to right now? I've been listening to a lot of Game of Thrones recap podcasts right now because I am all about the meta content. So, Cast of Kings, Storm of Spoilers, and Borsgore and Swords. I also, I also have really enjoyed the intermittently updated The Docket podcast, which is about law in Canada.
I was on that one. No, not bragging or anything. Just.
So, my partner's podcast, I don't just say that because she's my partner.
Or she's here.
It's or that she's in the room. It's the Tipsy Archives, and what they do is her and her partner Rachel Lee, they will have some drinks and they will discuss things that happen in history, and it's really actually interesting. They will find really interesting non-normal, sort of the traditional white man parts of history, and they will talk about them. And honestly, it's been illuminating for me, and I've really enjoyed it.
So it's the
Tipsy Archives.
Tipsy is in new.
Tipsy is in
Yeah.
tipsy is in drinking. Archives is in library. Tipsy Archives.
Library also tipsy. Okay.
Erin?
So I'm a big Planet Money fan, classic. I love CBC's Ideas podcast. And this one's kind of random, but if you're interested in local government on the other side of the border, KUOW's Week in Review is a great panel, sort of similar to this, that is about politics in Seattle and the Puget Sound area.
Sorry, if I could just make.
You only get one.
No, I already did like 4, so one more won't hurt. I also have a podcast about greatness and statues called the Mount Rushcast, which you should check out, and we update like never. But the
In 4 months.
the 11 episodes that are out right now are fun enough and should keep you satiated for a little bit.
I'd recommend The Boys in Short Pants, another Canadian politics
Yeah.
podcast out of Ottawa. A lot more kind of how the gears of government turn.
I've been on that one too, so is Dave Moscroft.
Yeah, it's good.
So I'd recommend that. Freakonomics Radio, Open-End Arguments, another legal podcast, but this one with a more American slant, but it's really good. And Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. I can list a whole bunch more, but I think that kind of covers the highlights.
I'm not opposed to cross-promotion, hence why a second podcast joined for our 50th anniversary. Which is why if you go to politicoast.ca, there is a page that it lists, as far as I can tell, all the Canadian politics podcasts I know of that aren't hyper-racist. So I avoid posting anything by Rebel Media or like Stormer, fuck them, but like Erin O'Toole has a new podcast out, apparently, like the federal conservative MP, Blue Skies or something like that it's called. I don't agree with him on a lot of things, but he's one of the more reasonable conservative voices. Canada Land I listen to all the time, as well as Canada Land Commons. Those are pretty obvious ones. Ricochet's got a pretty decent podcast about Canadian politics.
I just want to say something. Most of the podcasts on Canadian politics, whether it's Podkeeper Land or Politicoast or Boys in Short Pants or what have you not, are very male and white and affluent dominated. And if you have a podcast about Canadian politics at any level and it's not that, let me know. I want to listen to it. I really want to listen to it, and I will share it. I will share it with everybody. I will share it forever. I want
stuff on the.
On Canada Land Commons.
Canada
Canada Land Commons is a really good example of that.
Yeah.
Canada Land Commons is a really good example of a podcast that is filled with people of color, that is filled with people from non-affluent white backgrounds.
Not standard.
And I think that's really important. I want to hear from you guys, and I want to share it.
There's a mediocrely produced, but I enjoy it, lefty podcast in Canada that tries to be Chapo Trap House Canada, but it's not. And I also don't listen to Chapo Trap House. Called News You Can Use, but they sometimes go by Unique Canadian Podcasting. Sometimes Tim Hortons Presents News You Can Use. You can find it by one of those combinations. Drew Brown, who writes for Vice Canada, is on it, as well as another guy and 2 women who have columns. It's amusing if you like lefty stuff, but again, they are very open about how general and kind of shitty their takes are. So take for it what you will. I was thinking.
I think if you can listen to Rosanna Deerchild on the CBC, it links
that's a
you
good
to
one.
other
Yep.
things too.
Yep. No, agreed. Yeah.
Like she's music driven, I think, but like a lot of her stuff's music.
Yeah.
But you can still listen to her and get to other places too.
Cool. Other question.
Excellent.
We've answered.
I prefer it this way.
We have filled the world with.
Please listen to Podkeeper Land if you aren't already. We are going to sit down now and have a beer.
All right, thank you.
Matthew, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's been
Thanks
great
a
having
lot.
you.
This has been amazing.
Thank you. I'll just cut the normal intro.
Okay, awesome.
She has a book plug too, actually. I'm just a book plug.
Can we do a quick their machine thing on what we just did and have him send us the bulk of what we did so that we can share it?